Well, aloha and good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Yenji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalesuji. Happy Monday. This, of course, is Spotlight Hawaii. And Ryan, today we have a guest that really we wish we had an hour with because we have so much to talk about.
A lot of questions for him. Joining us from the Hawaii State Capitol is Hawaii Governor David Ige. Thank you so much for joining us, Governor Ige. We have a lot to get to, so we want to just start off right at the top. Of course, leading in with the COVID-19 updates and where we're at right now, the state continues to move an inch towards that 70% vaccination rate. Wanted to get your thoughts overall of where we're at and how long you think it's going to take for us to get to that 70% benchmark.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Angie. Right now, I did look at the current vaccination report. We're at 64.9% initiated and 58.3% completed with both doses of the vaccination. So, again, we are amongst the highest in the country with getting vaccinations. It has slowed down a little, but if we can maintain 20,000 or so doses administered each week, we project that we would hit the 70% in the early part of September. So that's kind of what the timeline looks like. As you know, the pace of vaccinations have dropped off a little in the past month, but it still continues to maintain about 20,000 per week.
We've got a comment here from Kenneth that I want to bring in because it speaks to a sort of, I wouldn't say disagreement, but some daylight between you and the Lieutenant Governor. He says, Governor Ige, please do not cave into Josh Green and open up. Hold the 70% benchmark for the entire population. Israel was 90% vaccinated, and now they are spiking. We do know that Israel is bringing back some of their mask mandates and other restrictions because the Delta variant seems to be taking hold there. The Lieutenant Governor, as Kenneth notes, is pushing for perhaps 65% when you add in the people who have been exposed to COVID through contracting the disease. Have you been having those conversations? Is there any latitude when it comes to that 70%?
Yenji, we do discuss it at several times a week, just looking at the virus activity and really monitoring what is happening all around the world. We believe the 70% is a good target for us. We're making good progress. We just have to remember that those who are not vaccinated are the most vulnerable. And those who are not eligible for vaccination are our children. And, do we want to put our children at risk during this time? I've heard from many that they don't want to. So I do think that it would be a mistake to drop that target. We are making progress. And we continue to monitor the virus activity. As you saw over the weekend, we saw a bump up in the case counts again. So we're over 100 per new cases per day over the last weekend, which looks like it's probably a result of the 4th of July weekend. And so I do anticipate that we'll be seeing higher case counts over the next few days.
When we look at other mandates, of course, we saw some of the changes and lifting of some of those mandates or options to do so last week, when in the city and county of Honolulu, restaurants were allowed to allow more people into their restaurants, given if they were allowed to have a vaccine verification or a negative COVID test that had been taken within 48 hours. What was your decision making through that process of allowing the city and county of Honolulu to move through that? And do you think that contradicts anything at all with the other benchmarks that have already been set up in place?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ryan. There was a real push, and others in the restaurant industry really said that as long as 6 feet of distance between tables is required, allowing for up to 75% maximum capacity in a facility is just not realistic. So we did look at the specific CDC guidance, and the CDC continues to suggest, remember, indoor dining is the most risky activity that our businesses engage with. It does require people to remove their masks. They're sitting, having dinner for an hour or an hour and a half. And if there are those who are infected, then people could be transmitted to. And so we did talk with the city and county about different things that would make sense. You know, the whole notion of giving restaurants the option of, verifying vaccinations or tests to allow them to increase capacity, we thought would be a good compromise without really ignoring the science and really allowing businesses to make some decisions on their own behalf.
I apologize for that technical difficulty right there. I was scrolling through the comments and I accidentally clicked back, so you'll have to forgive me. I hope there wasn't a glitch for the viewers other than me exiting the screen. I want to continue on with the mask mandate. There are some questions here. You know, we're, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we are the only state that continues to have a indoor mask mandate. What are your thoughts on dropping that? There is pressure, I would imagine, both ways.
Yes, thanks, Yanji, for that question. We do talk about the mask mandate. I am aware that other states now who may have dropped all restrictions are actually contemplating reinstituting mask mandates. I know that California is considering it, Oregon and Washington, those states that are closest to us. Because of the increase in the Delta variants and the number of cases that they're seeing. So I do know that wearing masks, especially indoors, is one of the best ways to slow the spread of the virus. I know that once we move forward, I don't want to be in a position to have to step back. And so, I'm committed to maintaining the mask mandate for now, as we see continued circulation of the virus in our communities.
Do you think that those who have tested positive or who have contracted COVID-19 should maybe count towards the percentage of the vaccinated population? We know that the Lieutenant Governor has said that if we count those maybe 5% of people who have survived and dealt with COVID-19, who have built that natural immunity, they too should maybe be included into that vaccination count. What are your thoughts on incorporating that into the overall state percentage?
Yeah, so that's one of those areas, I think, Ryan, that we, the science and the experts really are kind of divided about how to deal with those who have already had COVID. They do recognize that the natural immunity that happens when someone is infected is not as strong as the immune response that the vaccines, elicit once someone is in receipt of the vaccine. And the CDC guidance continues to be, even if you had COVID, they are strongly recommending that you get vaccinated as well. So because of that, we really do believe that we want to drive people to get vaccinated, even those who have been sick. The overall herd immunity that really takes over and reduces the spread of the virus in our community is not a hard and fast threshold that we cross. Dr. Char and Dr. Campbell believe that 70% of the entire population being immunized would be a good threshold that we're driving toward. And the other thing about those who already contracted COVID, Ryan, some of them may have taken the vaccinations already. So some of them may already be counted in the counts that we have. And it would be really difficult to try to split that out. We want to encourage everyone to get vaccinated, even those who had COVID. And if they do, that does help us in our community to get closer to herd immunity and really get to a safer place where the vaccine has a hard time to expand and explode like we've seen in so many other communities.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the CDC guidance when it comes to schools. Last week, they issued new guidance that said that students and teachers who are fully vaccinated can hold classes indoors without any kind of protection, PPE, social distancing, what have you. Does that change? Do you think that that should be adopted here in Hawaii? When we talk to Dr. Kishimoto, who of course will be transitioning out, but when we talk to her, and also when we talk to the teachers union, both said that they expect that masking will continue regardless. What are your thoughts on masking at schools, given that CDC guidance?
Yes, thanks, Yanji. You know, what we are working on is a layered approach at schools. You know, first and foremost, we want all students to be back on campus, in-person learning, because we know that a lot of what happens on school is really social interactions and the ability for students to be with other students. So as part of that layered protection, mask will continue to be a part of that. You know, wearing a mask indoors does protect and stop the spread of the virus. And we want to have that tool in the toolkit of the schools. We think it's really important. You know, it is different for middle schools and high schools because children 12 and older can get vaccinated. And we do anticipate, and, you know, we have been monitoring you know, many parents are choosing to vaccinate their children. And so, you know, that is helpful. As you know, the elementary school age children don't have the option. They're just not eligible for vaccinations. So we will continue to have mask requirements and look at other mitigation measures, you know, cohort the students, try and stop interaction between classes and grade levels, try and be outdoors and as much as we can, and really having the staff work in cohorts so that we minimize, you know, cross contamination of students, faculty, staff at all levels.
One of the things that this pandemic has caused is just unprecedented times, of course, and decisions that had to be made, especially on the executive level. And one of those things that you've had to do continuously is sign these emergency proclamations to extend different benefits, to allow for support for be state and federal funding for different programs and things to be stood up. Do you plan on signing and extending the emergency proclamation next month when that current proclamation expires?
Yeah, Ryan, we are working with the counties and the Attorney General and just really going through the specific rules and laws that have been exempted and really working with all of state government and county government to really identify those specific areas that we believe we need to continue under emergency conditions, and really those areas that probably that emergency action is no longer required. So I can tell you that what will happen in the next proclamation will be a lot more focused. It won't be as wide-ranging as the previous proclamations. You know, we've been looking at the eviction moratorium and tried to let everybody know we're really pushing the rent relief programs, mediation programs to really begin the dialogue between tenant and landlord. So that we can try to minimize the disruption as best as we can. But, you know, Ryan, we do know that we want to get back to normal. You know, we want to be able to get to the point where an emergency proclamation is not required. And so we continue to look at and evaluate those emergency actions that are not any longer required in order to keep our community healthy and safe.
On that eviction moratorium, do you anticipate extending it, or does it truly end in August?
You know, Yanji, we're working with advocates and the counties and all of the providers to really ask them to push hard to get people signed up for rent relief and really begin the mediation process. So we are working, assuming that we're going to end the moratorium. You know, obviously, I think part of that will be driven by how many people we can get into the rent relief programs and how many we can get into the mediation and what we think the impact of ending it would be to the broader community.
Of course, we know another big issue right now is tourism in our islands and the amount of people that are coming to vacation in Hawaii. And we had, of course, on this program last week, the Speaker and the Senate President to talk about their veto overrides, one of which one override had to deal, of course, with the structure of the TAT funding. I want to get your thoughts on their thoughts of the reasoning behind the restructuring of TAT in the state of Hawaii, and your thoughts overall about some of the decisions that they made regarding tourism and their management of it.
My biggest concern, Ryan, is that I do believe that there needs to be a state agency and the Hawaii Tourism Authority that really drives destination management. Excuse me. I think we definitely agree that we need to be changing how we spend the dollars that we use. And it may be necessary to reduce the marketing and advertising dollars. But we've seen over the last several weeks that without someone guiding, without someone working with destinations and airports and hotels to really focus in on getting the visitors we want, then we do have just unfettered access to the state of Hawaii. We do know that they are not spending as much as previous visitors. Many are staying in vacation rentals that are, many of which are illegal because they can definitely get a lower cost. And because of that, they're in the communities, they're creating traffic problems, they're parking illegally. It really does create friction between visitor and residents that really is not sustainable. So Ryan, I agree that we need to reinvest the TAT dollars differently. I think that we should reduce the number that goes into advertising, but I do think that we need to increase the dollars that go into managing parks and hiking trails, being focused in getting the visitors that we want, and really expanding mechanisms where we permit visitors in narrow windows, try to get reduce and spread out the visitors going into high attractive destinations, and really work at permitting access in a way that can really reduce the stress of so many visitors.
How do you anticipate doing that? I know we've talked about that in the past, and you did talk about perhaps supporting some more fees. Would it be like an arrivals fee where we have, like, let's say $100 eco tax to contribute to the stress that this has on our environment? Or are we looking at, permits for different beaches? Or if you look at, Diamond Head, I keep seeing all these pictures on social media and it looks like, trying to get into a ride in Disneyland as opposed to trying to see the view there. What are the specific mechanisms that can be implemented to bring about that kind of crowd control that you're talking about?
Yeah, so Yanji, it is about limiting the permits for travelers that may permit access to various locations. As we've said before, Hyanna is the example, and they were experiencing thousands of visitors a day, and they reduced the actual permitted visitors down to about a third of the peak levels. Trying to expand that opportunity with permits to the real high impact sites is one way that we would be able to manage that. It's also about controlling parking. We increase enforcement of illegal parking in Hyanna. We actually reduced the parking lot. We worked with the hospitality industry and the hotels to create shuttles that go through rather than having individual travelers park their cars and really create a real mess in the communities. I think all of those become important parts of how we can manage the numbers who visit in a much better way.
I do want to bring in a question here from Dot, who says the legislature did a power grab for the TAT funds. They now get all the funds in the general fund, which may or may not benefit tourism. What is the real purpose of collecting the TAT? It keeps changing, and now there's no accountability for where these millions of dollars get spent. with this change again in the TAT funding, which was initially set up to fund the Hawaii Tourism Authority, but now that the legislature has made that decision to move that and allow the counties to increase it more by 3%, that burden also being placed onto local residents as well. How would you respond to a question like this that asks about where this money is going and the general accountability of what the TAT was initially set out to do?
I agree, Ryan. I mean, that was one of the reasons that I vetoed the measure. I really think that I think that our community wants to see a tie between visitors coming, as expressed in the TAT, and really the community benefit that we get from the TAT tax. And so, I certainly would have preferred being able to see that in a real way. We've been using TAT to improve parks and beach replenishment programs and other very targeted expenditures with the TAT funds. And I really do think that we have to be able to demonstrate to our residents that the value of the visitors is revenues, and those revenues can be spent in a way that benefits the wide range of residents here in the islands.
There are a number of people here who are writing, just please control the number of tourists coming in. And I just want to get clarity on this one point. I know the answer to this, I believe, but I think that so many people have asked it. I want you to answer it as well. And it's just Carmen saying, can the governor limit flights to our airports? We're seeing, 30,000 plus arrivals every day. Can you just reduce the number of arrivals?
Yes. Thanks, Carmen, for that question. I cannot control or limit the number of flights into Honolulu International or any state airport. We are part of the FAA and the transportation system, and we cannot stop or prohibit any aircraft that wants to come to any of our airports all across the state from landing. Once an aircraft lands, then we can implement quarantine orders and things like that. But that's the limit of my authority as governor.
We seeing this divide in our community right now, and we know that a lot of things will have to be decided going into the next legislative session. But with the amount of veto overrides that just came forth with the legislative session, we know that there could be some disagreement between the administration that you manage as well as the legislature. How are you going to work with them, I guess, moving forward, knowing the concerns of the community and having this differences in opinions of things like the Hawaii Tourism Authority and TAT tax? Do you see that there could still be a way for some sort of resolution to come about that may provide a broader platform moving forward to manage tourism?
Yeah, Ryan, I certainly am committed, and we will be implementing the laws as passed and overridden by the legislature. They decided that they wanted to end TAT support for the counties, and we're going to implement it. And they decided that they wanted the counties to be able to raise the TAT up to 3%. And so, that's what we will implement. We started the process of destination management action plans with the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and that work is going to continue. It engages stakeholders and community members to really talk about the friction points and develop targeted plans to help alleviate the stress and the conflict that has been created. Now, we don't have dedicated funding for that. So if we come to a plan that makes sense, that everybody agrees to, then we would have to go back to the legislature to seek authorization and funding in order to implement. And we do have concerns because many of these plans and programs will require more than just one quick fix. If you look at Hyanna State Park, it will be an ongoing challenge. The permitting system, enforcing parking, trying to set up shuttle services from nearby hotels and things will require and incur ongoing costs. So we'll have to go back to the legislature each and every time and really seek funding for those solutions that make sense.
I want to bring in, I know we're almost out of time, but Christine Donnelly, who writes the excellent Kokua column in the paper, has a question here. She says, with the rise of variants among unvaccinated people, will Hawaii institute a vaccination mandate? I know you couldn't do that, for every citizen walking down the street, but you do have some power when it comes to state employees. Have you looked any further at perhaps making that a condition of employment?
Yanji, we are looking at that in a number of instances, and part of that is we are encouraging the CDC to get to regular use authorization of one or more vaccines. I know that Pfizer, for example, has completed the application for regular use, and we as governors are certainly encouraging the CDC to evaluate that and get it to regular use as soon as possible. When we've talked about it, there is a concern about mandating a vaccine under emergency use authorization. And so we are reluctant to do that until we can get to regular use. We are evaluating, and I know you guys have talked a lot about the cases at Hawaii Community Correctional Facility, for example, and the fact that the prisoners as well as the guards have chosen voluntarily to get vaccinated or not. And it really does create challenges for us. So we are looking at those kinds of situations and weighing the liability that the state would face against, requiring vaccinations for employees, and then what would be required to require vaccinations for, those incarcerated in the jails and prison situation. So, we continue to evaluate that. We haven't decided that we're going to mandate it at this point in time, but we continue to look at it as we see the case counts.
If we look and continue on going back to the 70% benchmark that you've laid out for the state, and I believe you mentioned earlier that projection is maybe looking like September before the state gets to that point. In the meantime, I wanted to get your thoughts on just any sort of large gatherings that may want to take place before the state hits that 70% benchmark, whether it be conventions coming in or concerts. The University of Hawaii investing a lot of money into their new stadium as well for football games to happen. Do you think that those types of large gatherings or those types of events can still happen even though the state does not reach that 70% threshold? Would there be any sort of accommodations, I guess, made for these types of large groups?
Ryan, the larger the group, the higher the risk. And so, we continue to work with university, for example. I'm a Rainbow Warrior fans, and I enjoy going to volleyball games, both men's and women's, as well as football games. And, I get it that people would want to have that opportunity to attend. But right now, especially with the Delta variant, it's really not safe to have people gathering in large numbers. We continue to talk with the university about different mitigation strategies that they can. Ryan, the biggest concern always with the spread of the virus is not so much the game time activity, which is a concern, but it's really, the socializing and the interaction that occurs before and after the events that really can become super spreader events. So, we are continue to work with all of the organizers to see what kinds of mitigation we can put in place so that these events can happen in a safe way. I went to an event with the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra at the Waikiki Shell, and they have people spread out. They very much limited the number who can attend, and groups are 6 feet apart. And right now, that's the guidance in a way to have an event outdoors in a safe way. And certainly, I think we'd be working with the university to see what that might look like in a football situation or other spectator event.
I know we're just about out of time, but I want to squeeze in one last question from the audience because there are so many people here who are asking today about managing tourism, and you did mention illegal vacation rentals. And so Carol's asking, what's your next step to shut down illegal short-term vacation rental? Really, that does fall to the counties, but what can the state do to help with that enforcement?
Yes, thank you so much, Carol, for that question. We are stepping up tax enforcement. I've spoke with Isaac Choi, who's the tax director, about things that we can do to identify and pursue vacation rentals that we believe is illegal. He also is working with the counties to see, we're prohibited from sharing data, but we are working together to see how we can help each other enforce, the permitting and authorization from the land use perspective at the county, at the same time that we're looking to ensure that they are legally permitted vacation rentals that are operating. So we are making good progress, and I can assure you that that's a high priority for this administration. Really, we see what the impact of illegal vacation rentals are in our community, and we do believe that that with so many illegal vacation rentals, it makes it virtually impossible to manage travelers and to control the visitor experience that we see.
All right, Governor Ige, we went a little over, but we thank you for taking those questions. Again, we could have spoken to you for an hour with so many questions that we have, but we appreciate you taking time this morning and also staying a little longer on to answer all of our questions here. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you, Yanji. Thanks, Ryan.
Aloha.
Appreciate the opportunity. Aloha.
Thank you. Aloha.
Well, great to hear from Governor Ige and getting those updates on a wide variety of issues. Again, starting off with COVID-19 and where we're at as a state. The state continues to march towards that 70% benchmark that he has put in place, and saying that based on calculations, it may be all the way until September before Hawaii is able to reach that 70% mark. And then at that point, reduce those restrictions that have been put into place. But seeming that there may not be much of adjustment there, that the governor still seems to be steadfast on reaching that goal.
Yeah, you don't hear him wavering at all on the mask mandate indoors. He's saying, look at some other places in the United States where they're wanting to bring those mandates back. So he doesn't want to change that. And that 70% really is the gold standard for him. He did sign off, as we noted, on the mayor's allowing more capacity in restaurants. But that, of course, is only with vaccine verification. And it becomes up to the restaurant to actually enforce that. So, you really see him holding fast on that. And also with schools, saying that masks will be worn indoors in schools, even though the CDC has said that fully vaccinated teachers and students can remove those sort of social distancing and mask measures. He's saying basically we can't necessarily verify every single student. And so until then, we're going to keep that in place.
Yeah, a lot of wide variety of topics discussed, including, of course, all those veto overrides that happened last week by the legislature, going against what the governor had hoped to do to preserve the funding mechanisms for the Hawaii Tourism Authority, as well as the structure of the TAT funding. But those veto overrides, again, going through the legislature last week, governor saying that he will continue to work with the legislature and enforce, of course, the laws that are now going to be established and in place by those overrides. But clearly there needs to be a lot more work done on how the state manages tourism moving forward. As we see in the comments alone, still a lot of people very opinionated about house tourists and the volume of people really visiting the islands right now.
Yeah, and we appreciate all of you who tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We also want to let you know that Spotlight Hawaii is also a podcast. So if you want to catch this on the go, maybe you don't have time to tune into Facebook, look for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Just type in Spotlight Hawaii. You can catch up. We have over 140 episodes, Ryan, archived there. So go back and listen. But this is a great way to consume this content because it is really nice that we get to take a deep dive with our leaders. And Ryan, we're kind of throwing it back on Wednesday. We've got former Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell who will be joining us then.
That's why we're looking forward to just catching up with the former mayor, hearing his thoughts on where the city has gone since he has left office, what he's been up to, and any future plans that the mayor has, former mayor, I should say, has moving forward. As we know, next year will be another election year. So looking forward to catching up with former Mayor Kirk Caldwell on Wednesday.
Until then, we wish you a fond aloha. Stay safe. Wear your mask indoors. Get vaccinated if you can. And until then, we'll see you 10:30 right here on Wednesday with former Honolulu Mayor Kurt Caldwell. Aloha.
Aloha.